Thanks so much for listening to No Lions Here with me, Big Panda. Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome back to No Lions Here. My name is Big Panda, and I'm a recovering sex addict. Welcome back to the show. First and foremost, before we get in today's episode, I want to give a shout out to my sponsor, Beginning In Institute. Definitely check out their information. It's in the description. If you have any questions or know anybody that's struggling with sexual addiction or intimacy disorder, definitely go and check them out. As well as if you're listening on Spotify, definitely go check out our YouTube channel. And if you're checking us out on YouTube, definitely go check out the full catalog of all 70 episodes on Spotify as well. And again, those links will be in the description. On today's episode, special guest, I'm really excited to have this guy on in studio with me. Off camera, though, is a brother of mine in the program, someone who is a part of my home group on Saturday nights. This guy, man, I mean, ever since I met you, Sean, and you share, man, I shut everybody else out. You've got a lot of wisdom and you bring a lot to the table and a lot to that room that we're in that on Saturday night. So I'm really excited to have you on. I know I asked you probably a couple months ago to come on, and, you know, it's one of those things where, you know, hey, coming on a podcast, like, it's not an everyday thing, you know, not a lot of people do it. And you're like, let me think about it. And then, you know, I had kind of given it some time, and then I asked you again and you were like, yeah, actually, man, I thought about it, and yeah, I want to come on. So joining me in studio today, Sean, thank you so much for joining me, man. Welcome to No Lions Here.
Yeah, thank you, Alex. Thanks for the kind words. Very much appreciate that. And yeah, I'm happy to be here and to share, my experience, strength, and hope. And hopefully someone out there can connect to it. And, yeah, so really grateful. Thanks.
Yeah, absolutely, man. And this is, you know, selfishly, this gives me an opportunity to learn more about you. You know, because obviously I hear you sharing in meetings and things like that, but, you know, there's some parts of your story that I don't know. So, you know, I'm really curious to see what we get into, and again, just kind of soak up some of the knowledge that you have, because again, man, I think you've been in recovery for some time now.
Yes. So initially came into recovery in Alcoholics Anonymous at the age of 24 in 2004. So my original sobriety date was April 4th of 2004.
Wow.
So struggles along the way, and several relapses, and my recovery date now is 7/11/2016. So it's, continuous sobriety and multiple fellowships. And when I look back at that 24-year-old who entered recovery, I did not realize how much help he needed. And I just knew I was in pain and suffering, and I didn't know what to do. And it started me on my journey in recovery. So just grateful that that 24-year-old decided to seek some help.
Yeah, and to stick with it too.
Yeah.
You know, that's a long time. So obviously, okay, so it started with AA.
Mm-hmm.
What was there something that happened to you that was like, oh man, I need help?
Yeah. So I was not able to not drink. And there are definitely drugs involved in experimenting with different types of substances. But I would drink, and couldn't understand why I wasn't able to control it.
Mm.
And I'd look at the friends around me and just very disconnected and in a lot of emotional pain. And I saw my life heading in a direction I didn't want to go, but I didn't know what to do.
Mm.
And so the initial thing I did was I emailed a cousin of mine and said I need help, that I was struggling. Always a good student. At that point in college, I had a 4.0 grade average. And that was kind of like my justification that I was doing okay.
Mm.
And so I saw that, I was heading downhill faster than what I thought. And yeah, so I decided to reach out, and I got some help initially.
You bring up a good point there of like, yeah, I probably shouldn't be doing what I can't stop this stuff. I can't control it, but overall I'm doing well. You mentioned having a 4.0 in college and saying, well, the wheels haven't completely come off yet. So
Right. And kind of having perspective in recovery and going back, so I took my first drink when I was 16. And what I didn't realize was, like, looking at consequences, there's different levels of consequence.
Mm.
And so what I didn't realize was that with that first drink or first drunk, that I lost my integrity.
yeah,
I lost my ability to be honest and truthful. I lost my ability to connect with people through vulnerability. And it looked like things were okay on the surface, and kind of what we hear in meetings, which is, I didn't get in car accidents, I didn't get this didn't happen, but all that happened on the inside. And it just, like with any addiction or alcoholism, it just continued to progress over time.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. And so getting into AA. So then what? Obviously, the podcast is about sex addiction, and so then what got you into the S rooms, the S meetings?
Yeah, so at that time, I had taken a break from school to get help. I went to initially outpatient, and then had a relapse with alcohol, and then went to inpatient, and then outpatient again. So it was recommended that, based on my history of history of sexual abuse,
Mm.
and to seek help. And I went to a sex therapist. I think I went a handful of times. I don't have, like, a lot of specific memories of it. I know that I was guarded a lot, and I didn't really get into a lot of the trauma that happened. But one of the things that happened out of that was I was given a book by, forgetting the author now, but it was Don't Call It Love. And I still have that book. And when I went through it and read it, I just connected and have, like, highlights and notes in the corners and stuff. And but I really didn't have anyone in life or in recovery to share that stuff with.
Mm.
And I didn't continue with the therapy. I guess, looking back, perhaps I wasn't ready to explore that. So there was definitely an idea that I needed help in the area of sex and love and intimacy and relationships. And so I attempted, in kind of like recovery wise, was try to use my recovery in AA on all aspects of life.
Mm.
And I found that that didn't necessarily work for me.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So obviously, I have the cocaine addiction, and I've found that just doing the S stuff has really helped me curb. Well, also too, realizing that, like, sex is like my main core addiction, right? I think that started so much younger than the substance stuff. It just got to a point where I needed more and more and more. So then the substances come in, obviously, and but I found that in the S community, S meetings, the work around that, the therapy around that, like, that's helped me immensely with the substance side of things, and that those cravings are essentially not there. Obviously, knock on wood, and God willing, I'm sober from those today. But I found that those thoughts are in and out of my. If they do pop up, which they do, it's in and out.
Yeah, so kind of like the rest of the journey, and like into SCA is went away to graduate school and kind of sexually acting out.
Mm.
And what would happen a lot of times would be I'd be on the phone with someone in AA in recovery on my way to go act out, and I didn't have it in me. Either I couldn't or wouldn't be honest about how I was living. And so I got a bunch of S literature. I went to one or two S meetings at that time. I was actually a little bit like taken aback at my initial introduction, and so my mindset was, okay, I'm going to work on this alone by myself, and said prayers, and I think that the prayer at that time was asking God to relieve me from my lust and just a cycle of shame of sexually acting out, wanting to stop, wanting to live a spiritual life, wanting to be the person that I was hoping I could be, and just sinking further and further into the shame cycle of acting out and trying not to. And then one of the hardest and most painful things was having to keep it secret.
Yeah.
Right. So that was a lot of the kind of surrounding the relapses I had. But alcohol and drugs was the double life of being in recovery in one area and sexually acting out, and not knowing the depths of sexual addiction. And so I did that for about 10 years. And what ended up happening was, after that last relapse with drugs in 2016, was I was free from obsessive thoughts. Like, I didn't have sexually acting out thoughts for about 6 weeks afterwards. And I was walking the street one day, and the thought came in that it's going to happen again. That no matter what I do, no matter if I pray every day, no matter if I write multiple inventories a year and do multiple fifth steps, no matter how much service I do and meditation, that if I didn't get connected with an S fellowship, that I was going to act out again against every good intention that I had to stay sober. And kind of how I view some aspects of recovery is that, my first step in sexual recovery started with another member's 12th step. And that was an individual that let me know that he was in S recovery. And that made it safe for me to go to my first SCA meeting here in St. Louis.
Yeah. Wow. So when you're in AA and you're still, like you said, you're still acting out sexually, was there any kind of thoughts around, around the honesty around that of, I can't tell, they won't understand because it's not drink or drug?
Yeah, to a degree. And there are times that I would just kind of hint or gently walk around that aspect. And there were like no one in the meeting would identify. And it felt really lonely in those meetings. But afterwards, like in the parking lot, there'd be a couple of people that would come up to say, "Thank you for sharing that. I really identify with it." And there was a sense of gratitude that there was a connection. At the same time, it was kind of disappointing as well. And when I look back, I can see that it wasn't. I needed a different fellowship, a different level of connection, which is what I found in SCA, and particularly our home group, which is really meaningful to me and really changed my recovery. So without getting into SCA and getting a sponsor, working 12 steps in SCA, I participating in our home group and in the fellowship, I I don't think I'd be able to have continuous sobriety in my other programs. And so this is really foundational for me as kind of what binds my recovery together in different areas.
Yeah. Yeah, you mentioned, kind of sharing some or tiptoeing around and sharing some of that stuff in some of the other meetings that you attended. And that reminded me of a time. So I've been to, a handful of NA meetings, and all good stuff. And I'm not knocking any program at all, right? I think whatever program you're in, work it, stay there, right? There's a benefit to it, and more shall be revealed if you belong in a different fellowship. But I remember I was in one. I laugh, but and I think I was sharing I was dealing with some grief around my ex-girlfriend. I think this was like the first year or two into my recovery, and I was sharing that like I was missing her and wanting her back or whatever it was. I really don't remember what the share was, but it was funny. I didn't share that I was a sex addict, and after the meeting, a guy came up to me and was like, "Hey man, just cut your hair, get on Tinder, you'll get a new girl in no time." And it was kind of one of those things where like I kind of, I had to be gracious and like, thanks, man. Thank you. I appreciate that. But on the inside, I'm thinking, oh no, bro, I can't do that. Like, I can't get on Tinder. I can't. That's not what I need. But I was like, thanks, thank you for saying that. I appreciate that.
Right.
It's just kind of funny that like, even people in recovery. Again, I think that sex and porn and one night stands and guys being guys, like it's just so normalized in today's world that like, oh, you're a guy, you look at porn, it's nothing.
Right. And the inner journey is the difference of how that affects me on the inside. And there's really not a lot of places outside of that I know outside of S recovery where we can be honest and open about what it does to us on the inside. And sexually acting out, I used to have intrusive thoughts, and like I a little bit different than obsession to go act out. These would be kind of surrounded by a lot of the trauma that I went through when I was younger and the sexual abuse, and I didn't have a way to deal with it, and I was very ashamed and afraid to share that with other people. And so what ended up happening was I found enough safety in the S meetings here and began to share it bit by bit, and that allowed me to connect with other people and knowing that wasn't alone. And the journey also included going to a sex trauma therapist and doing EMDR. And so the kind of the healing that I found in S recovery, spread to include the other areas of recovery.
Yeah.
But I and kind of going back to what initially started was not knowing how much help that 24-year-old needed.
Yeah.
And there's just so much healing, in a way, like I feel that I'm healed and healing at the same time. It's just ongoing process.
Yeah. Yeah. I remember there was somebody in one of our meetings one time that shared she was a part of a different program. And I brought this up many times in this. And I think that this kind of just highlights the point of S recovery is, she was in other rooms and she was like, we all know how fucked up each other are, but we don't talk about it. Whereas in S rooms, we talk about how fucked up we are.
Yeah, right. So I went on a sponsorship retreat that was mainly AA, but I'm also an Al-Anon, and so there's a lot of people that I know in both and do both. But at this retreat, they were talking about 80-20, where 80% of the stuff we talk about in recovery, it's just kind of surface stuff. But there's 20% of stuff that we generally hide. And for most of my recovery, that's what I find is that it centers around sex in some form,
Mm.
right? Whether relationship end or sexual abuse or sexually acting out and sexual addiction, love addiction. And there's really not an avenue to express that in other fellowships, and rightly so. There's primary purpose to each fellowship, and but that's what, yeah, we tend to lead with that 20%, and we get it out there. And I think the vulnerability is one of the things in meetings that's really different about other fellowships and other meetings. It's that we really get to what's hurting, and then share with how we're healing.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's definitely you can tell when, like, because and maybe this is just for me, but like I know when I'm not being honest, and I know what that looks like for me, and I've been there. I'm not ashamed to say that, like, yeah, there's been plenty of times in my recovery where, like, I lead with the surface level stuff, right? Or I tell my sponsor what I think they want to hear, but really I'm leaving out little details. And it's like, I can't leave out any of the details. I have to look at every part of my day, and I got to be honest about those little 20% details, because those then add up, and they just pile up on top of each other until I get to the point where I'm like, well, there's no way out of this other than sexually acting out.
Yeah. Yeah. It seems to be the only option at a certain point. And, that's kind of the delusion that can happen while we're in recovery and not sexually acting out, that leads to us acting out, can lead to acting out. Yeah, one of the things early on in recovery was getting a sponsor and being able to call and just leave a message, which I heard it said later on that it's kind of like sending a prayer to God, right? Just leaving a message. And so there would be moments where I would pass an area that would I'd get triggered and just really uncomfortable, like an area where I previously acted out and not know what to do. And I would just call and just say, no, this is what's going on. I just, drove past this area, and, I don't feel very comfortable. I just really want to go home and kind of like hunker down. But I just wanted to reach out because I know that I need to share this. And I was really thankful that he didn't pick up, because I'm not sure if I would have been that honest. And so it was through those type of situations where just beginning to share about this area that I kept secret for so long. And a lot of it just centered around thoughts. And there's, at this point in recovery, there's, background stuff that just, comes and goes. There's like but on a daily basis, yeah, I have to practice spirituality, practice the 12 steps, the tools that we're well familiar with. And but it's not as threatening as it used to be.
Yeah. Two things that you said there. One was the voicemails. Like, I love how you put that as, like, that's like saying a prayer to God. That gives me a whole different perspective around leaving voicemails. Like, yes, because I always viewed it as, and shout out to Jeff. You want to talk about leaving voicemails? That man never calls without leaving a voicemail. And honestly, like, seeing him do that taught me how to do that.
Right.
And the way that it put, that I looked at it was, okay, maybe someone's not on the other line listening to me, but I'm still saying this stuff out loud, because I think that part of one of the things that we deal with is not saying these things out loud, right? Because once we say these things out loud, the energy shifts around them, or I can hear myself being like, oh, wow, like, I was really thinking that. Oh, I really don't want to act on that. So I know that, but I really like the perspective around, like, that's like saying a prayer to God. That's like reaching out to God. That's, yeah, I really like that. That gives me a new idea. Yeah. I tell everybody, hey, if you make phone calls and nobody answers, just leave voicemails.
Yeah.
Let them know what's going on, And then my problem is I hate when the voicemail cuts me off.
Right. Yeah.
I was like, man, let's just get into the good stuff. Like,
Yeah. Some
what do I do? Call him back? Like,
some days need like a 10-minute voicemail. So.
if any of the big cell phone providers are listening to this, can we extend the voicemail a little bit, please, just for people in recovery? Yeah, and then talking about just the spiritual aspect of this program. I know that anytime I hear you share, there's a lot of spirituality in kind of some of the stuff that you talk about, and obviously that's a huge part of recovery. Is it truly is a spiritual solution to a physical problem. And I'm a firm believer that this is a spiritual program, and that I tell people all the time, like, find a higher power. Doesn't matter what it is, find a higher power, because we have to believe that something is greater than us and that can guide us through this stuff. And that is just like, that's a key pillar of the program. And what I love about the program is we have these pillars, right? But it doesn't tell us this has to be your higher power. It's, hey, man, it's up to you. Higher power and fellowship.
Yeah.
That's like what we need in this program.
Right. Yeah.
So but you get to pick. Sean gets to pick. Alex gets to pick. Okay, how does that work for me? And I think that that's kind of the beauty, because then it gives me the option to decide and research and decide how I want to go about these pillars of recovery that are so important.
Right. And you mentioned something that it took me a while to learn, and which was I can't have a relationship with others in recovery without having a relationship with God.
Mm-hmm.
And I can't have a relationship with God without having a relationship with others in recovery. And I learned that through the hard lessons of trying to do sexual recovery alone in secret, and that there's something special. And as we've been talking, not just in the meeting, but our connections outside of the meeting, that when we connect with each other, God's there also. Looking at my relationship with God, it's been very interesting. The first time, like, I had an idea of wanting a relationship with God, I was about 6 years old, and maybe 7. So first grade. So yeah, maybe 7. And other students in my class, it's a large Jewish population, and they would go to synagogue. That there was one day a week where they got to leave afternoon, like a couple hours early, and then there was a big Roman Catholic town as well. They would go to CCD, and there'd be like a handful of us who were there finishing out the rest of the day and whatnot. And I was just curious one day, and I remember asking my mom, like, those kids, like, why do they go to this CCD? And like, who's Jesus and who's God? And I, interested. And so I ended up, when I was 8, starting CCD and learning about my religion, which was Roman Catholic. And so that be kind of my journey initially. When I came into recovery, I can look back now with a different perspective and see how much shame I was carrying. And that influenced my concept of God. And when a couple of years ago, I did an inventory around my relationship with God, and saw that my main fear was that when I needed God most, he would abandon me. And what I have learned as well is that guilt is fear of punishment, and that shame is fear of abandonment. And that, right there, my relationship with God was, shame-based. And so when I really needed God, it wasn't really that he was going to abandon me. It's that I didn't feel I was worthy enough to approach him. And that's a hard way to live.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah.
So what ended up happening was I was on a silent retreat, and the leader of the retreat did this imaginative prayer. And he picked out a verse in the Bible, and it ended up being the prodigal son. And we did the imaginative prayer, and what occurred for me was I was the father, and I could see the son in the distance walking, head down, full of shame, and feeling excited. Like, oh, that's my son. Like, I gotta go run. Like, I'm running, and I just feel all this energy inside of me and all this love well up. Like, oh my, he's here. And it was like running across the fields and going up and like, bring the sandals, bring the robe. He's here. Let's celebrate. And what I came away with was that that's how God loves me. It doesn't matter what's going on. He's just happy that I'm returning home. And that hasn't left me. And my relationship with God has totally changed um, because of that experience. And so what I relate to people now is I have a little, well, he's not a puppy anymore, but he's a year and a half. Is a Frenchton. And when he comes, when I come home and he runs up, and he's just wagging his tail and just so excited and everything. And it's like, that just reminds me on a daily basis, like, that's how God feels towards me, and to know that, it just really reminds me of that feeling from that day that I did that meditation. So.
Man, I remember you sharing that story in the meeting once, right? And it was really powerful. But hearing it again, man, I don't know. I'm just like, I'm overwhelmed with emotion because that's such a beautiful thought. Because I have really struggled, not so much today, but I've really struggled with that relationship with God. And, growing up in a very religious household and very, very much spiritual abuse happened. And, I heard early on, like in recovery, a counselor told me that like our view of God is our view of our parents. And, I grew up in a very performance-based house. So therefore my view of God is I wasn't perfect today. So therefore God's like, sorry, man, you weren't perfect today. I can't give you what you're asking for. Right. Come back when you're perfect, and then I can give in a little bit. Right. And so I've had to do a lot of work around that, in break that idea of what God is to me, and that God is loving. God, all of this is part of the plan. Anytime if I act out, it's part of the plan. And it's not like, again, I've said this before too. It's not like, oh man, Alex, I had these great plans set up for you, but then you went and acted out, and well, dude, I got to go back to the drawing board. I got to go back to the drawing board because you threw a wrench in this, and I got to figure out how I can help you through this. When it's like was all part of the plan, and it's just, it's still a struggle a little bit here and there, but yeah, it's much better for me today, and to see that like the God that I believe in is a loving God.
Yeah, absolutely. It seems to be that, as each of us have our own individual path, we're not walking it alone, but it's a path that we each have our own struggles on in attempting to live a spiritual life. But we also have our, individual personal relationships with God and what that experience is. And early on in recovery, there's a gentleman that used to say, you have to go from your head to your heart. Like, yeah. And then,
yeah. I've been there.
Like, what does that mean? How does it go? And then, it begin to have a felt experience by living the program. It's different than the knowledge of the program. And for many years, I had a lot of knowledge of the program. And kind of what happened was learning that knowledge is insufficient in and of itself for recovery, but it's necessary. It's necessary to have knowledge of how to do things in recovery, but it's really the felt experience of the journey. And kind of, looking at the steps, there's directions on how to do things, right? And that's kind of like the mechanics of it. And but then there's the spirit of the step, and in looking at it with kind of God's perspective, it's like my heart's in the place where it needs to be. You know, whether I stumble through a step or I don't feel like I'm getting it, then I need to go back. You know, it's all part of the journey, as you said.
Yeah, I love that part that I love that point around like, yeah, I've got a lot of recovery knowledge, and I used to think that like, and that's something that really kind of frustrated me early on was like, I'm a smart guy. Like I know, especially in recovery, I've taken it seriously and yeah, I've got all this knowledge and, look at me and, I can spout off all this knowledge about recovery, but yet I'm looking at my own life and my own program going, yeah, man, you're struggling with sobriety. You're struggling with sexual sobriety, man, but I've got all this knowledge. How come I'm not staying sober? And it's like, it wasn't weighing out like
Right.
at all. And then it came to like, yeah, well, you can have all of this knowledge and still not, again, kind of feel it in your heart. And, but like you back to the hammering that point in of like, knowledge is not everything.
Yeah, it's and it seems to be that I think people approach S recovery a little bit different than some of the other recoveries, where there could be a kind of a real emphasis on kind of doing the steps kind of word for word. And one of the things that maybe it's our group or maybe the SCA here in St. Louis, it's very open in regards to like whatever recovery literature is helpful, like use it. Where in some other fellowships, it's like, well, that's an outside book. Like we only do our own. And I think that adds to a different level of experience from members, and that we're using stuff that works for us, and that may not necessarily mean the same literature, and so we're getting all these different aspects of recovery and sharing that, and I think that's helpful in regards to offering a variety of different experiences.
Yeah. Like the word that comes to my mind when thinking of that is autonomy.
Yes. Yeah.
And that like in recovery, I found that in my own recovery, like that because there's enmeshment in my childhood, like I never had that separation of like where Alex started and Alex began. And so I'm basically, recovery to me is one aspect of it is finding out who I am. What am I? How do I learn? What values do I have? Like, and so being able to go out and kind of find different tools that isn't by the book, helps me find that autonomy of self and be my own person instead of just kind of falling in, or not, not falling, but conforming. I'm not talking any crap on any of the other fellowships, right. But it's that whole idea of like, yeah, I can fall in line, but also too, I want to explore on my own.
Yeah.
And able to find myself, I need to be able to do that. And I think that that's a beautiful thing of the program is like, hey, whatever helps you, do it. And then in that we get so many different cool perspectives around or in the room and around the table, like all these awesome perspectives of things that I would not have thought of, oh, wow, let me look into that. Or
I can, one that comes to mind, I haven't thought about in a while, but it was kind of going back to some of the childhood stuff, right? It's like, it didn't necessarily cause any of my addictions, right? But it contributed.
Yeah.
And I was at an S recovery retreat, and there was a woman there who was sharing her story, and she had been sexually abused. And then she was in a relationship with a man, and she had a daughter, and her daughter was sexually abused. And she was sharing how she wasn't able to really be there for her daughter because of she never healed from her trauma.
Hey guys, I just want to take a minute to share something deeply personal and transformative in my journey of recovery. I've been where you might be right now, struggling with the weight of addiction and feeling lost. But there's a place that offered me a new beginning, a place I truly believe in. It's called Begin Again Institute. At Begin Again, they understand the deep-rooted trauma behind addiction. Their 14-day intensive program for men tackles the neurobiological aspects of addiction head-on. It's not just about breaking a habit. It's about understanding and healing the underlying trauma that formed it in the first place. And for those who have been impacted by betrayal, Begin Again extends care to partners of addicts too. Their partner support program is offered at no additional cost to the family and runs alongside the men's intensive. This program helps participants gain an understanding of the trauma they've experienced and sets them on their own path to healing. If you or someone you love are grappling with sexual addiction, pornography addiction, or intimacy issues, Begin Again Institute can be that pivotal step towards recovery and a new lease on life. Remember, you can't go back and change the past, but it's never too late to begin again. To learn more about their life-changing program, visit beginagaininstitute.com or call 720-776-9076 to reserve your spot in the next 2-week intensive. I promise, it'll be the best call that you ever make for yourself. Stay strong, keep fighting, and keep tuning in to No Lions Here for more conversations about recovery, resilience, and hope.
Trauma. And that just really opened me up for a lot of the resentment I had towards my mom for not helping me when I was younger. And, a lot of this, looking back, is just generation after generation of trauma and shame that gets passed down. And and that's one of those things that if I'm not in recovery and I'm not listening to other people share their experience, strength, and hope, I miss out. And it was like in that moment that when I heard that, it was just years of resentment just melted away. And just forgiveness and compassion for my mom. And it was like, wow, maybe you can get that reading, in a book or listening to somebody, listening to like an audiobook or something. But for me, only so much recovery can take place in solitude. And because a lot of the injury and hurt and shame and harm that we've experienced happened in relationship.
Yeah.
That the healing needs to be done in relationship as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I recently kind of had a situation with my mom where, she kind of brought up, growing up, because there was sexual abuse in the household that I had like blown the whistle on and nothing was done about it. And yeah, I've been very bitter towards my mom, very, very bitter. And then we were recently talking, and she kind of explained like, Alex, I was just trying to survive. And that just like, that kind of, that same kind, that just like, I was like, oh, I can relate to that. I can relate to that. And wow, I understand that.
Yeah.
And again, that compassion and like the resentful and the bitterness just kind of like, definitely like opened me up to a new way of thinking around her and the situation that I grew up in. And yeah, she was just doing what was best. She thought she was doing what was best. She was trying to keep herself safe, the kids safe. Like that was wild. And again, touching on like, you can only do so much recovering in solitude. Like I was talking to my sponsor recently about like, because earlier on in recovery, you'd hear all these guys talking about like, oh, I'm reading this book right now. I'm reading this book. I'm not a huge book reader. And I would shame myself. You need to be doing more. You need to be doing more. Well, in a conversation I was having recently, it's like, I can only take so much from books. I'm an experienced guy. I want to go out experience these things, and that's how I learn. I could shut myself away for 6 months with all the books I wanted. Doesn't mean I'm going to retain any of that knowledge or be able to practice that knowledge at all. If I'm constantly in solitude trying to recover, I don't get any chance to practice the things that I'm learning. So let me go out, let me have experiences. Sometimes I know the experiences aren't what I should be doing, but so I need to go out and I need to practice this stuff.
Yeah.
And again, hearing other people talk gives me, oh, wow, yep, I can relate to that. Like, okay, yeah.
Yeah. And especially kind of going from the initial kind of idea of coming into sexual recovery, it's like, just don't act out, right? And then there's a transition to, well, what does a healthy relationship look like? What is healthy sexuality and sensuality? And there are moments in past relationships where I could say that was present. Like I kind of have a sense like, oh yeah, there's moments of that in amongst, the larger landscape of sexual addiction, right? And so kind of getting into relationships and kind of dating and, whatever kind of aspect that looks like for people, or even just socializing, right? That mistakes are going to be made.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And it's like, the heart's in the place where it's like, I'm going to try and do this, and it's like, oh, well, maybe that's not the best thing for me to do in recovery. And, that's going to look different for different people.
Mm-hmm.
And again, it comes back to, having people, having connections in life with people in recovery where it can share that and it's not shaming. It's like, yeah, this the only way to find out really is to experience it and find out, what that looks like for me in my recovery. And it changes over time.
Yeah, that's one of the things I love about the program. Two things about that I love about the program, and you kind of brought it up, was like, yes, the goal is to not act out sexually, right? And that's what I kind of think kind of separates recovering sex addicts from recovering alcoholics or drug users is, I don't ever want to. I'm fine with never going back to drugs and alcohol ever again. I totally want to be I want to abstain from those things for the rest of my life. No questions asked. I'm fine if I never pick up another drink again, right? I don't want to abstain from sex for the rest of my life. Right. So in order for us to, yes, again, staying sexually sober, but also learning how to integrate it into our lives in a healthy way. And I think that is so much of the work that we have to do in recovery for sex addiction, is because, again, if I don't pick up and drink, I'm sober today.
Yeah.
Right. But sexual sobriety looks so much different. And again, I want to integrate it into my life. And okay, so what do I need to do that? Well, it takes a lot of inner work, a lot of stones. We're not going to go in and unturn every stone. Again, back to that 80-20%. I really got to look at that 20% hard, because that's where the healing is. And that's how I learned how to integrate it into my life. I always thought it was funny too, in our literature, there's tools, and one of those tools is dating. And I remember when I first came in to SCA, I started in SAA and then transitioned to SCA, because obviously here in St. Louis, that is the biggest S program out there. And I'm so thankful that I'm in it. But yeah, you come across that tool and it's like dating, and it was like, I was really confused. Like, how's this a tool?
Yeah.
How's this going to help me stay sober? This is going to make me want to act out. Like, that's because that was my idea of intimacy, before getting into recovery, was all physical intimacy. Didn't know about all these other aspects of intimacy, mental, emotional, spiritual. Like, I didn't know. I thought it was just intimacy is sex. Yeah. I can do that. Yeah. All right. Well, so what's wrong with me? But yeah. So and then now realizing that, like, well, yeah, dating, you get a chance to practice a lot of things.
Yeah. I think that's where it's helpful to have sponsor and being able to kind of speak about that. And early on, I was just kind of just happy that the intrusive thoughts had stopped, and I wasn't hounded by the obsession to sexually act out. And it was like, all right, well, if I'm never in a relationship again or get to have sex again, it's like, I think I probably had enough, you know. um, and it was just like, I just don't want to go back to that, because it was nearly intolerable amount of pain and shame within the sexual addiction. And then just started slowly opening myself up to that. A lot of it also was working with the sexual trauma therapist, and I did some sexual or trauma massage, and that was really helpful because I didn't even know what like a kind touch was. My body reacted as if it was still in the traumatic position of when I was little, and that and I had these reactions. I didn't know why. I didn't understand it, and it really closed me off from people. Um, and so just even kind of working with the massage therapist, and it started out that she'd be like, "Is it okay if I, massage your shoulder?" And be like, "Oh, I get an option here. I get to say yes or no." And it was just like a huge thing just to say yes, that's okay, or no, that's not okay. And um, and then working with there's one exercise with the trauma therapist where she stood across the room and like slowly approached me and took a step and said, "Is this okay?" And I said, "Yes, that's okay." And kept on coming, and she got like really right up in my face, and it was like I had no idea of what my personal space was. It's like it had been violated over over time, so many times that I just didn't have any idea. And then we switched, and she had me approach her, and it was so painful, like each little step that I took towards her. And that was one of my things of being just very inhibited and fearful and scared of approaching somebody, because on a certain level, I didn't know if it was safe or I can trust people. And so kind of going back of like putting aside just the sex part of sexual addiction as like, or intimacy, as like there's all different levels of physical intimacy that can just be between friends, right? Like in the fellowship and learning to ask people, is it okay if I hug you? It's like, is that all right? And people say, yeah, and then hug each other. And then, it's something that we often don't think about.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
But just the kind of that level of kindness and love, that's a more kind of brotherly love, or or sisterly love, however we want to say it.
Yeah.
But it took me to learn that, and so really grateful that I found the help that I need in regards to that. And then other things like the tools of like bookending a date, calling before and after, and just to check in and just see how things are. I had one, my Al-Anon sponsor, we went over it. He's like, "Well, what's your intention for the date?" And it's like, "Oh, well, I don't know." It's like, well, you might want to have one. So if you're going to get coffee, it might be to go get coffee and have a conversation for 45 minutes or an hour. And then that's what the intention is. And it's like, oh, okay. And then kind of bringing that into the conscious thought. It's like, okay, like I'm not hanging around to see if there's any intrigue afterwards. Like, how do I extend this date? How do I, like all that manipulation or justification in the mind that can lead us into trouble. Those are just kind of simple things that I just needed to practice and learn. So I was sharing with someone, I said, I used to for dates, have them at ice cream parlors because I love ice cream. And so no matter how it went, like I would enjoy the time
Yeah.
ice cream. And if, connecting with someone on top of it, like that was a bonus, but that was one thing I learned to do. Like, yeah. So it's been interesting dating in recovery. Said I've had 3 relationships, and for the most part, each one was a little bit healthier than the last.
Sure.
So, not sure what's on the horizon at this point, but yeah, just kind of continuing with what wanting to be the person that God wants me to be, and so whatever that looks like, that's okay.
Yeah. There's something that you brought up there around like the fear of sex and how you said you said I think I've had enough of it in my life that if I never do it again, I'm okay with that. Like, and I know for me and my experience, like definitely like there's been times where I've been afraid, and I can see how being in recovery for sex addiction can totally turn people sex avoidant.
Mm-hmm.
Because I know that my way of thinking was, well, if I'm in a relationship and sex, that's just going to trigger me to want to go act out. Because while I'm already here, I'm already doing something that I'm in recovery for. Again, it's a very black and white thinking though of I'm in recovery for sex, so therefore sex is bad. And then that ties into the childhood of religion. Sex is bad before marriage. Oh, well, I'm not married. I'm in recovery. I'm a sex addict. I am bad.
Yeah.
Wow. I need to just avoid sex at all costs because that's just going to open up Pandora's box. When in reality, and the more that I grow and heal, realizing that like, it's not going to be like that. If it's in a healthy way, if it's done right way, it's almost that bonus intimacy. Work on the other intimacy first so that then when you do get physical, it's not any kind of acting out. Because that was one of my big questions was like, okay, so we can have withdrawal after an acting out period, right? Well, does that not mean that I'm going to have withdrawal after sex with a partner? Because it's again, very black and white, very analytical of an orgasm's happening either time. How am I not going to have withdrawal from sex with a partner opposed to acting out?
Yeah.
And it's like it's the levels of intimacy that are there. Acting out, there's no intimacy. I'm trying to get what I need or what I think I need. Whereas with partner sex, that's more intimate. There's more intimacy there. I'm not running from anything. I'm actually expressing something with somebody.
Right.
And that makes a difference. And, I haven't had a whole lot of, I've had some dating experience. Obviously there was a time there where I had to get over my last relationship and, where I'm at today, is it a top priority for me? Not a top priority. It's on the list. It's one of those things where like, if it happens, it happens.
Mm-hmm.
But, I'm kind of in this place where I'm like, I got a lot going on. Do I even have time for that? And looking at, and that's what I love about the recovery too, is I get to look at my life and be truthful with myself around that. Like, what's my capacity for these things? That's a big thing that I like to look at is like, what's my capacity right now? And capacity ebbs and flows. What's my capacity for a romantic relationship? Or also too, if I really feel like I'm really needing that, well, then I need to take a look at that because that seems like more of a want than a need. I can fulfill my needs in other ways. I don't need a partner to do that. Trying to fill that woman-shaped hole inside of us, and that's not the answer to all my problems. And I know that now, right? Like I can look at my life and say, yeah, would it be nice? Yes, it would be nice. Mm-hmm. But is it something that I actually absolutely need? No.
Yeah. Yeah. And, at this point in recovery, and it's been like this for a little bit now, of not needing to be in a relationship and then being open if there's to explore if potential for dating or a relationship. And so it feels a really healthy kind of perspective, kind of, kind of when you were mentioning, the difference between the healthy intimacy and then the acting out, and I look at it as difference between having loving connection, versus shame and fear and driving the acting out. And there was a point in one of our relationships, and it was gone out for a number of months, and it had become sexual, and she knew I was in S recovery, and we would speak about it and talk about it. And there was a moment where I found out that something was becoming, it felt like it was on the verge of that. And so the tough conversation and being truthful is like, this is what's happening. And the possibility that, this could end the relationship, this could do, but whatever could happen, right? The mind tends not to go to the best possible outcome.
Raising my hand. Yep.
And what it did was, because it was surrounded by this, mostly healthy, loving relationship that had multiple levels of intimacy, and that vulnerability ended up being matched by her vulnerability, right? And just made things stronger. And there was one episode or event that really brought it home for me. I had a traumatic reaction in the middle of a sexual experience with her, and my body just froze, and I wasn't able to vocalize what was going on. It was just like I was just in the middle of a traumatic reaction, and she just held me. Like, she didn't ask what's going on. She was like, "It's okay," and we just sat there, and she held me until my body kind of went through what it needed to go through. And when I look back at a lot of my acting out, it was, kind of centered around that I just wanted someone to hold me and to know that I was cared for, and to experience it in sexual recovery. And it's just one of those things that I never thought, like, walking in those first couple of days of like, I'm just not going to act out. Like, I can have that experience and be okay. And it's amazing kind of some of the opportunities that we get to have healthy relationships in recovery.
Yeah. And not be, thank you for sharing all that. I really appreciate that. The idea of rejection is one for me that is very much alive inside of me. And I'm so terrified of being rejected. One of my goals for this year is, I sat down with my sponsor, and I've done this for the last 2 years, is write out my goals. What are my goals for the year, right? There's science behind you writing down goals, and that's going to help you achieve those goals. So it wasn't a goal of, okay, I want to get into a relationship this year. The goal is to put myself out there, because I'm so terrified of doing that. Because again, I don't see my own worth. I don't see my own value. Whereas now I'm starting to kind of grow into that and see that rejection does not mean that I'm not good enough. It just wasn't meant to be. And my therapist told me this like last year at some point in time. And she was like, what's rejection? And I was like, well, that's failure. She's like, well, can you look at it as like, it wasn't God's plan for you? I was like, yeah, I can totally look at it like that. Yeah. And so now with the idea of like, all right, I want to put myself out there. Well, okay, what does that look like for you, Alex? And I think it was last week. On Sundays, I go and I work at the treatment center that I work at. And there's a gas station that I pass. And I go in and I get my chew. And there's a cute little gas station attendant in there. And we know each other's names. And I was like, you know what? I'm going to ask her for a number. This is me putting myself out there. So I went in last week, and of course, man, that fear, that anxiety, oh God, I'm going to stumble all over this. And I did stumble a little bit, but I was like, hey, are you seeing anybody? She was like, yeah, I am. Okay, no problem. Like, we'll keep this professional then. All right, have a good day. See you next time.
Mm-hmm.
And I got to walk away, and at first it was like, but then it was like, she didn't say no because of who I am. She's seeing somebody. Okay. All right, I can get on board with that. That's not my fault.
Right.
I'm not, she didn't say no. She was not rejecting the person of who I am. She just can't, she has boundaries around that. Good. Like, and I found myself for the rest of the day, I totally forgot about the experience because it wasn't so loud in my head of being rejected that I was able to. It wasn't until I picked up the phone, 8 hours later to call somebody about my day that I was like, halfway through that conversation, I was like, oh yeah, by the way, oh yeah, I put myself out there today. Like, and then it was cool to see that in me, and it like built that confidence up in me that like, it's not about you. You are good enough, Alex. That just wasn't supposed to be. And there's nothing wrong with that. But I found that it was just really cool to see that like I wasn't obsessing about it every day or that whole day.
Yeah, those are the positive experiences, the opportunities, right? To take that leap in recovery and to know that God's there for us, and our fellows on this journey are there for us to share that experience with, however it lands. The fear of rejection to me is that it feels very personal and very shameful. You said that and part of my acting out was actually acting in, or sexual anorexia. And so it was confusing for me because there were periods when I was in sexual addiction and I wouldn't act out for a while. And it felt like, oh, this is, I'm doing what I need to do and everything. And it was just another aspect of the addiction. And so that could take place. And that's something that I'm kind of learning what that looks like in recovery as well. I can fill my life up to such an extent where I'm so busy that it is a form of acting in, and closing myself off. And so for me, that's a little bit more challenging than the acting out aspect, because I know what that looks like. I don't necessarily know what acting in looks like. There's some things that I do kind of relate to, that's kind of I can acknowledge that it's acting in, but it's a little bit harder for myself to identify. But that's one of those things that that even just going up and asking someone for their number, or just saying, hey, I'm interested in getting to know you a little bit more, that is a healthy thing to do. And if I'm fearful to do that, then again, kind of need to take a look and to see what's going on the inside.
Yeah. Acting in, it's not something that I've necessarily like really thought about, but it's something that you said that I can relate to, is like keeping myself so busy. And that's something that I've definitely dealt with. Again, it goes back to, all this stuff can be attached and associated with my childhood. Mm-hmm. Growing up in a house where, hey, we've got sports practice, we've got church, you've got a game. Don't sit on the couch, go outside and play. Go outside and play. Go outside and play. And it wasn't until just recently, because I've been talking about this my whole recovery, didn't realize like what kind of trauma loop that kept me in. Just a very avoidant. Well, if I'm just so busy all the time, well, then I don't have time to sit and feel what I need to feel or look at what I need to look at, because I'm just so busy. Mm-hmm. Some people are workaholics. I'm a distractaholic. Like, I can distract myself with the best of them. I can give probably a doctorate level college course on distraction, because I just keep myself going. And when someone said that in a meeting about that keeps them in the trauma loop, I was like, dude, it hit me. I was like, oh my gosh, like, yeah. Wow. It keeps me so tightly wound internally, which I already am, and so, yeah, that makes a lot of sense though, that acting in. And
yeah, and it could do the same thing with recovery, right? Like, not just kind of outside busyness, but inside busyness of, I got to read this book, this book, this book. I got to do another fourth step inventory. I got to pray more. I got to meditate more. And then, all of a sudden it's back in solitude and not connecting and being all alone. And oftentimes when that's happened, there's either a wall that goes up, right? I can tell you one. So I generally meet one of my sponsors every other Sunday. For years, we would meet almost every Sunday, and there was a stretch where we weren't able to meet, and so I was like, yeah, maybe I should just give him a call. And it was like, nah, he's probably busy. And it was like, red flag, right? If I can't just pick up the phone and call someone and just say, hey, right? Especially someone in recovery, because it's been a little bit of time, then, that's an issue for me. And so the idea kind of around that was that I was just too busy with things, and it's like, life's never that busy where I can't stop and pause and reach out or pick up the phone when someone calls, or maybe go to another meeting. And so yeah, I think those are lessons along the way, and just being open and sharing where we're at, we can learn from each other about what that looks like and potentially could look like in our own life.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, the lesson there is, hey, pick up the phone.
Yeah.
If I'm not, and that's a really good perspective too, around like, if I feel like I can't pick up the phone, red flag.
Yeah, especially if nothing major's going on. It's not like, it sometimes could reach a point where we get into a loop of things seem like they're going wrong on a daily basis, right? And so it's like a reflex just to pick it up. And then it's like, well, things aren't going bad now. Things are actually going good. I don't need to call.
Yeah. That is definitely like bled over into like my spiritual practices as well. Early on in recovery, I just felt like I was in desperation mode, constantly crying out to God, give me I need a miracle. I need a miracle. I need a miracle. And then I'd have a good day and I wasn't crying out to God.
Yeah.
Whereas now, whether it's good day or bad day or neutral day or whatever the day looks like, I still got to reach out.
Right. Yeah.
I still got to practice that spiritual program, that prayer, the phone calls, and I know that one of the things because I've been the last month or so, I've just been in a completely different space. Things have really transformed for me in my recovery, and I've evolved. And somebody, told my sponsor early on, was like, if you want to keep it, give it away. Oh, okay. Well, I want to keep this good mood. So you know what I'm going to do is I'm going to call somebody and try to give this away to somebody.
Yeah.
Because my good mood is going to, one, I can be there for somebody else. And two, maybe my good mood's going to rub off on them. And that's going to lift them up for the day.
Right.
So, that definitely, I'm a firm believer in that. In order for us to keep it, we got to give it away.
Yeah.
And so instead of, I'm in a good mood, I'm not going to make any phone calls. I don't need to, or I'm not going to pray. It's just as simple as stopping and saying, thank you, God, for today. I'm really grateful for today. Thank you, God. Look at all these things I've got going on that are really good. Thanks, God, for that. Or picking up the phone and saying, hey, how's it going? I'm in a good mood today. How are you doing?
Right.
I'm really grateful. Something I've really been trying to say. And you do a really good job of this, is every time I see you, hey, Sean, how's it going? I'm loved.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I've kind of there's so many things that you've shared in meetings that I still use on a daily basis of nowadays when people ask, how are you doing, Alex? I woke up this morning. I have everything I need to get through the day. I'm doing good. Yeah. I'm breathing. I'm breathing. I woke up. I've got everything I need to get through to today, just for today, And there was something else that you shared. Well, actually, I wasn't at this meeting, but I heard this from somebody else, was that, you talked about anytime you're scared of going and doing something, before you go in and do that, you say, God, I'm scared. Come with me.
Mm-hmm.
Help me through this. Man, I still use that to this day. Yeah. A lot of things like that. Also, too, child of God, loved by God.
Yeah. But I'm glad that, kind of as you well know in recovery, right? We get things from other people or something like that. So yeah, just being a vessel and passing those things on. But yeah, I still use, those things because they work. And, yeah, I said that, before we started the podcast today of, just taking a moment and saying, if I do this, God, will you go with me? Yeah, that works. That it puts me where my relationship needs to be with God. And the child of God, loved by God, I say that a lot when I see people, like either when I'm driving or walking around, and it's just another way to connect with people and to share, the love I have, and loving kindness, and just, you said call up somebody and just share it, right?
Yeah.
And so, what the effect is that, um, it just continues to cultivate that love in my heart each time. So yeah, really grateful that, people had passed those practices on to me, and that I can share them with other people. And yeah, that's the heart of recovery, is that, we share our experience, strength, and hope.
Yeah. Yeah. It's funny. I use that child of God, loved by God when I'm out with like my non-recovery friends, and they're, we're in a bar, or wherever we are, and they're like, "Oh, look at those girls over there," and I'll chime in and I'll say, "They're children of God, loved by God."
Right.
And like,
I'm sure that lands differently at times.
luckily my friends are aware of my story, and know what I do. So like, it's kind of like a light shaming, a light guilting, like, I'm in good spirit, but it's kind of funny because I do use that with them. Like, but it's a reminder for me though too, to not then, because I don't police people. If I'm around friends, or if I'm around people that I work with, sexual talk and sexual jokes, that's a part of society. And if I can chime into my friends when they're objectifying women around us, that then reminds me, don't give in to that.
Yeah, right.
Don't give in.
Yeah.
They can do whatever they want to do. I'll allow them to be them, but I don't need to comment on that.
Right. Yeah. And it helps, in regards to limiting objectifying. And yeah. So I think that's pretty cool that you're able to do that with your friends who aren't in recovery.
Yeah, and they just kind of roll their eyes at me. Yeah. And then they kind of like, yeah, all right, yeah, you're right. Like,
Yeah.
that's a human being with emotions and feelings.
In people in recovery, when they ask me how my day is going, I often lead with, but sometimes that slips out with people who aren't in recovery, and they're like, oh, okay, like, cool. Oftentimes I'll say with someone who's not in recovery, I'll just say, pretty awesome today, right? And one of my sponsors, his response is awesome, but getting better. And so there's a number of people that are in that kind of sponsorship lineage that share that awesome, but getting better. And one day I thought to myself, like, it just doesn't ring for me, like the connection there isn't. I was like, what's something that's true that I can say that that I can connect with, and it's, I'm loved. And like, no matter what, right? I'm loved, whether it's in that moment when I'm feeling the love from God, or the love from fellowship, or love from a friend, that, with the love I have for myself. I was like, that's true in any moment. And one of I use the spiritual exercises of Saint Ignatius at night to do my nightly review. And one of the lines is there. It's God is loving me in this moment, and that rings true.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
yeah.
Man, that idea of, I was sharing this with a client at the treatment center recently, around like, hey, I think he was talking about going to the dentist and being scared, and I was like, well, hey man, before you go in, say, hey, God, I'm scared. Will you come with me? And he was like, and this was like a second stint in treatment, and really smart guy. And he was like, yeah, he's like, you're right. And he's like, you know what? I have to watch my expectations though, because by asking God to come with me doesn't mean that things aren't going to go wrong or it's not going to be rocky. That God's going to help me through it no matter how it goes. But he's going to be with me on the other side of that too.
Mm-hmm.
And that also hit a chord with me, is like, yeah, okay, well, why are you saying this? Are you inviting God in, Alex? Because in this, I can really get into the weeds with some of this stuff and just way overthink it. But yeah, it's like, are you saying this because you want things to go your way?
Mm-hmm.
You know, and I gotta think about that and say, God, I'm asking you to come with me because I don't know how this is going to go. And I got to trust that you're going to be with me with no matter how it goes. And it might not go the way that I want it to go.
Right.
But no matter what, you're going to be with me. So that really stuck with me around that saying. I was like, oh, wow, that's a really good point.
Yeah. There's, kind of the ego can dress itself up in spirituality.
Yes. Oh, yes, it can.
The mind can twist a lot of things into, the selfish, self-centered view. And yeah, that's one of them in regards to like that subtleness of, I'm going to do these things because I want a specific outcome.
Mm-hmm.
And kind of thinking like of outcomes in a spiritual sense, the outcome is always the same versus kind of in our general experience with things, right? And what that is that God is present with me and is loving me through the whole thing, right? And so the outcome's the same, whether I think it's the way it should go or not go, or a surprise, that I'm pleasantly surprised with something. It's that from a spiritual perspective, it's always the same.
Yeah.
And so that was kind of the other side of the same thing that you just, articulated of what that statement means, which is, I'm asking God to go with me. I'm just acknowledging what spiritual truth is in that moment.
Yeah, that's really good. I really like that perspective, man. That's really great. There was one thing before we wrap all this, I want to be mindful of your time. We're like an hour and 22 minutes right now. So, dude, time flies when you're just sitting in here just talking. Like, time flies. Again, we could sit here for another hour and just go into so many things. But, we'll leave that, and I'll definitely want to have you come back on because there's so many more questions and things that I think that you've definitely brought up that I'd love to dig into with you.
Mm-hmm.
But one thing that you shared last night was a prayer. That whole prayer around.
Yeah.
Would you mind sharing that? Because I really selfishly, I really liked that.
Yeah.
And I forgot it. So I was like, well, shoot, I'm gonna have Sean on tomorrow, so I'm gonna ask him to end with that with that little prayer.
Let me. It's in a book, and so it's and I'm forgetting the name of the book and the author. So maybe that next time we can, or maybe you could put it in the description of the podcast.
Yeah, absolutely.
So people can find it for themselves. It's may I be loving in this moment. If I cannot be loving in this moment, may I be kind. If I cannot be kind, may I be non-judgmental. If I cannot be non-judgmental, may I not cause harm. And if I cannot not cause harm, may I cause the least amount of harm possible. And for me, that really encapsulates my practice of the 7th step.
Yeah. That's really good, because we have intentions, but we don't always. It's hard for us to hit those perfectly.
Yeah, and that's kind of the freedom to just be human.
So. Yes, absolutely. Well, Sean, dude, thank you so much, man. I really appreciate you coming in and joining us on the show. And this was a great conversation, man. I had a lot of fun. So again, man, thank you so much. I definitely want to have you back on in the future. And just continuing to share the strength, hope, and I just messed that up. Experience, strength, and hope. That's it.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah. So thanks so much, Sean. I really appreciate it, man. And as always, guys, keep coming back. It works if you work it, and you're worth it. We'll see you guys next time. Yeah, no, so you see